Welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And it's Ian Bailey that we're going to look at. My old friend here, I've looked at him a few times before. There's a cold case review going on into the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier, and I believe this cold case is really worrying Ian Bailey. And we're going to look at some of the statements that he has made to see what is going on. What do his words reveal? Sophie Toscan du Plantier, the anniversary of her murder was just before Christmas, 27-year anniversary of her murder. As we know, no one in Ireland has been found guilty of or even put on trial for the crime of murdering Sophie. And also there's a cold case review by the Irish police, the Garda, going on at the moment. And this has caused Ian Bailey to give a couple of quotes to newspapers. And we're going to look at what he says there, dig into the words that he uses to see what it is that's going on with him. And we'll use something called truthful deception. The basic idea of truthful deception is, in general, we as human beings, we hate telling lies. That might mean that we will tell the truth, but a very limited version of the truth, but we try to avoid lying whenever possible. What that means in deception is sometimes what we don't say will reveal as much as what we do say. So we've got to look at what isn't said as well as what is said. And also something else to watch out for: when someone repeats words or phrases a lot, that indicates what's important inside their head. What's the top priority? It will leak out in the words that they use. As always, if you have a like button, this takes a good few hours to put together some content like this. It comes to you at no cost, so if you press the like button, that would be repaying me and also help get this out to more people. I'm always interested in any comments or observations or questions that you have, so please do that either by commenting here or by getting in touch on social media. And if we get enough comments and questions and observations, we may do a follow-up video dealing with some of them. You can share this with people who you think might be interested in it. An interesting stat I discovered at the end of last year was that my most shared platform is WhatsApp. And obviously, we don't get to see shares on WhatsApp. That's people's personal communication channels. So I was really interested to find that out. Really gratified that people are sharing the content with their friends or with their communities on WhatsApp. So sharing helps get more people to this as well. And as always, you can subscribe to get notifications and get new content when it lands. And not just about debunking people like Ian Bailey or even saying someone like him is telling the truth, but it's also about giving you some skills and some techniques that you can use in your life to work out what it is that people are truly saying to you in their statements. With that in mind, in Ian Bailey's words, I want you to watch for a few things. I want you to watch for feelings versus knowledge. So feelings is when we think something, when we kind of have it inside us that maybe something is happening, versus knowledge, which is straightforward, something we know is factual and something we know is true. Talking is straightforward. Watch for when Ian Bailey uses straightforward wording, when it's really easy to understand what he says, versus when he uses really convoluted phrases and it's not quite easy to understand what it is he means. We'll talk about that as we go. And as I said, watch out for repeated words and phrases used by Ian Bailey. If you spot any that I don't, by the way, please get in touch on social media, get in touch in the comments and let me know. Repeated words and phrases and concepts are things that are often high priority, things that are worrying us, things that are playing in our mind. It comes out in our language. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the first of the two articles. Both articles are linked, by the way, in the description of this if you want to delve into them and see a bit more about them. And the first of Ian Bailey's statements. Ian Bailey says, "I called for the cold case review. I wrote to Drew Harris on a couple of occasions requesting an objective cold case review. But from what I hear via the media, it seems that this so-called cold case review is a subjective review." What's going on here? When does anyone ever say that they want an objective cold case review? Surely we just want a cold case review. Why is he qualifying it with the word objective there? And I don't believe I've ever seen him say, I've seen him say several times that this cold case review was because he asked for it, but I can't remember him ever saying that what I want is an objective cold case review. I just remember him saying that he had asked for a cold case review. And then Feelings versus knowledge. This is not based on what he knows, but it's from what I hear via the media. So he's not entirely 100% certain what is going on in this cold case review. It's only what I hear via the media. And then it seems, so he doesn't know, he just feels, it just seems that this so-called case review, so he's putting it down there, but again, he doesn't know what is happening in it. It's a so-called case review. He doesn't know if it is a case review or not, just a so-called case review. So he's really qualifying what he's saying here, and really that's really quite weak, isn't it? And he doesn't talk about why he thinks this isn't an objective cold case review, why he thinks it's a subjective cold case review. He doesn't explain any of that whatsoever. He's just talking from a position of weakness about what he's heard in the media. It seems that this is happening. He doesn't have any facts to back this up. And sometimes, as you know, that we worry most about what we feel and what we think is happening, and rather than what we know is happening. Often when we find out what the truth is, that helps calm our minds down. But I don't get the impression here that Ian Bailey has a calm mind about this whatsoever. He doesn't explain. It would be really helpful to know why he thinks it's not objective, why he thinks it's subjective. Ian Bailey continues, "It seems to be trying to put me in the frame for a crime I'd nothing to do with. I am sympathetic towards the French family, who I know believe I am responsible for the crime. I cannot change their minds, but they have my sympathies." So more of this weak and qualified language. It seems to be trying to put me in the frame. So again, he doesn't really know what's going on, and what he believes, what he thinks seems to be happening is really eating away at him, I believe, from his words there. Twice in this extract, he refers to the murder as a crime. Now, the murder of Sophie Toscan du Plantier was a horrific, brutal murder. You'd be hard-pressed to find one that was worse. But he doesn't refer to it as a brutal murder or a killing at all here. He refers to it twice as crime. It's a crime, and the crime. And often when people are denying a crime that they're being accused of, when they're denying falsely, they downplay what has happened. So instead of saying, "I didn't steal the money," they'll say, "I didn't take the money." They'll say, "I never touched him," instead of "I never attacked him." And Ian Bailey here refers twice to the murder as a crime, not proof that he is guilty. It's just an interesting observation that he's downplaying the severity of what happened. Ian likes to talk about here, he's sympathetic towards the French family and they have my sympathies. He doesn't say why. Once more, he says something, he's got some words to come out, but he can't say why he feels sympathetic towards Sophie's family at all. He can't say what he feels for them. He can't say how hard it must be for them or anything like that. He doesn't vocalize anything beyond saying the kind of cliches, "I'm sympathetic and they have my sympathies," which is undone for me by the disrespect of calling them the French family. I am sympathetic towards the French family. That's terrible. That's really disrespectful. It's not Sophie's family. It's not the victim's family. It's just the French family. In fact, I don't know about you. I get a whiff of xenophobia about that as well. The French, so, screw them. That's what that feels like to me. I am sympathetic towards the French family. I really, really don't like that. Notice as well that Ian talks about this crime through the prism of himself, not through Sophie, and not through the fact that, as he says, he's nothing to do. It's a crime I had nothing to do with. He doesn't speak about it he only speaks about it through himself, not through anyone else. So he said they're putting me in the frame for a crime I had nothing to do with, not a crime that someone else did. Not at all mentioning the fact that there's someone else there that hasn't been caught. Not at all that he wants to get justice, he wants to get answers or anything else. Just this crime I had nothing to do with. And talking of that, he says, I cannot change their minds. Again, that's through the prism of him. Let's just go to the position that he holds, which is that Sophie was murdered by someone, not him. Well, why does he think that only I cannot change their minds? Surely if it wasn't him and there's a cold case review going on, why does he not think that new evidence would change their minds? Why does he not think that new information could change their minds? Why does he not think that new progress in the inquiry could change their minds? Why is the only thing in his head, I cannot change their minds? all this through the prism of himself. He's a very selfish, self-centered person. I can see that in almost everything that he does. But as well, I'm interested in why he looks at this crime only through the prism of himself. More from Ian. This cold case review seems to be taking some time. I would have thought I would have heard from the Garda by now. And if you're international, I always point this one out when I do Ian Bailey. Gardaí is the Irish version of the police. So anytime you hear Garda, it is the police. So Ian says, I would have thought I would have heard from the Garda by now. I have said I am willing to cooperate with their investigation, and that has not changed. This is one for me. I thought I would have heard from the Garda by now. Now, why has he phrased it that way? The words we choose are not accidental. They're the ones that we really have in our heads that represent our thoughts, our feelings, and also events that we know have happened. So why has he said, I thought I would have heard from the Garda by now? Why not, I thought the Garda would have questioned me by now, or I thought I would have spoken with the Garda by now? I think that's because the word heard is what is important to Ian Bailey there. He wants to hear from the Garda. He doesn't want to help them. He doesn't want to talk to them. He wants to have heard from them. And I think that's because he's very worried about this cold case review. As he says, he feels they're trying to put him in the frame for it. And he wants to hear from them so he can get a sense, either in what they say or the questions that they ask, of what it is they're thinking, of where they are at in this investigation. I think that is why he's phrased that as, I thought I would have heard from the Garda by now. Ian Bailey says, I am willing to cooperate. Well, why they need to tell us that? Anyone with an interest in finding the truth, in finding justice for Sophie and her family, of finding out who did this, and especially Ian Bailey, who's, in his words, is what he was telling us, he would be wanting to get off the hook. He would wanting someone else to be found guilty of doing this crime. So why does he need to tell us that I am willing to cooperate with the investigation? That is a given. You do not need to prove this. You do not need to say this out loud. I am willing to cooperate. It's distant as well. It's I am willing to cooperate. So this is about something in the future, not I am ready to cooperate. I look forward to cooperating. It's just willing to cooperate. I'm willing to lose some weight this year, but will I or will I not? We don't know. Will I go on a diet? I don't know right now. I'm willing to lose some weight, and he is willing to cooperate. It's distant. There's not a lot of commitment there. The other thing I spot in this extract, this cold case review seems to be taking some time. Now, earlier he was kind of dismissive about this cold case review. It was a so-called review. It was subjective. But now he's worried that it seems to be taking some time. And I think time is worrying him here. The longer it goes on, the more he worries, the more he has these feelings in his head that they're trying to frame him, that it seems they're after him. And I think that is why he mentions this cold case review seems to be taking some time, because there's another way of looking at it. They could be going through everything rigorously. They could be really painstakingly going through all the information and evidence that they have. And, you know, I bet Sophie's family may think that is a good thing. It's taking some time. It's not a cursory sweep through what is happening, but it's a real rigorous investigation. But not for Ian Bailey. He's dismissive that it is taking some time. I think that's because the longer it goes on, the more he hasn't heard from the Garda. He wants to know what it is that they're doing, but they're not talking to him. I think this is burning him up inside. Now, the next article we're going to look at is from the Irish Times. There's quite a long setup for this. I think it can be best summed up by quoting from a paragraph from the Irish Times first. So this is from them. Contacted by the Irish Times, Mr. Bailey played down the significance of Mr. Gozzo's observations. Mr. Gozzo, I believe, is Sophie Toscan du Plantier's uncle. Mr. Gozzo's observations, repeating his denial that he was the man observed by Miss Farrell on Main Street in Skull when Miss Toscan du Plantier left her shop about 3:30 p.m. And here's what Ian Bailey has to say about that. I did say that in the podcast, and I think it's provable in the statements. I'm sure it's in there in the statements somewhere, so it is provable. I wouldn't be able to put my finger exactly where it is mentioned, but I know it is there, and certainly it was being said around Skull at the time. The very first line of this extract, I did say that in the podcast. Utterly believable, so truthful. Truth is normally said in a very straightforward way, a straight line from A to B. I did say that in the podcast. You can tell just by hearing that or looking at that exactly what it means. Ian Bailey did say what he's accused of saying in the podcast. It's so straightforward, and this is what Ian Bailey looks like when he's being honest. It's what most of us look like when we're being honest. A really simple, straightforward sentence. I did say that in the podcast. Even more believable because it has the word I in there, so there's ownership of it there. In complete contrast to everything else that's there. So I did say that in the podcast, straightforward and believable, and then the rest. I think it's provable in the statements. I'm sure it's in there in the statements somewhere, so it is provable. I wouldn't be able to put my finger exactly where it is mentioned, but I know it is in there, and certainly it's being said around Skull at the... What? That is just word mush, and look how it changes between being feelings. I think it's provable. I'm sure it's in the statements somewhere. And then he realizes maybe that's mush. It doesn't sound so convincing. So he then says, but I know it is there. I know. Well, you don't, because you've only said you think it's there and you're kind of sure it's there. And certainly it was being said around Skull at the time. So actually he's gone from, I think it's in the statements, I'm sure it's there. But I know it's there. And even if it isn't, it was being said, but not in the statements. It's absolute rot, that absolute rot. I don't know what more to say about that. It is just so, I said, can you picture what someone means when they're talking? Can you get the picture there? I did say that in the podcast. Yeah, I get that exactly. And then the rest of it, I'm sure it's provable in the statements. I'm sure it's in the statements somewhere. I had trouble reading it out. That's how gobbledygook, that's how garbled that it is. Ian continues, anyway, it's such a minor point and clearly designed to try and perpetuate the false allegation that I was the man following Madame du Plantier in Skull that day, and that I was in some way involved in the murder of Madame du Plantier, that it hardly merits consideration. It's a load of nonsense. And Ian has moved here into the language of manipulation and control. He's telling us what it is we should think. It's such a minor point. He's telling us it's a minor point. It's not worth thinking about. Clearly designed to try and perpetuate the false allegation. Clearly, by the way, this is controlling language. He's saying it's what's clear about it. Almost like if you don't think it's clear, if you have some other thing going on here, you're a bit dumb because it's clearly designed to do this. Don't argue with this. That's exactly what it means. It's the language of control and manipulation. It hardly merits consideration. If you're considering it, you're stupid because it hardly merits consideration. It's a load of nonsense. So the language here of control and manipulation. But do notice, by the way, he said it's such a minor point, not it's not a point at all, or it doesn't bear, it's just it's nothing. It's not nothing. It's a minor point. That means it's still a point. And also it hardly merits consideration, which means it merits consideration. Yeah, just hardly merits consideration, but it does merit consideration. So even here, he's trying to tell us this is not worth thinking about, but in his own words, it's a point. And it does merit consideration. So even within the controlling language, the truth of what he really thinks comes out. I'm really interested when he says the allegation that I was the man following Madame du Plantier. His use of the word the man there says to me that he believes or knows that someone, a man, followed Sophie in Skull that day. Because he doesn't say it's a false allegation that I followed Madame du Plantier. That's how I would expect it to be worded if there was no following that he was aware of. But he seems to be aware that someone followed her that day because he talks about the man, not just puts away the allegation that it was him and just say, it's a false allegation that I followed Sophie that day, but it's that I was the man. So I think from that, Ian Bailey either knows or believes that someone followed Sophie on the day that someone was supposed to have followed her, which I believe is the day of the murder. He definitely, from that use of the word the man, I think he knows. How does he know that? Let's have some fairness to Ian Bailey. He called it the crime before. He called the murder, the horrible murder of Sophie, the crime before twice. Here he does refer to it as the murder. I was in some way involved in the murder of Madame du Plantier, so not downplaying what happened there. I was in some way involved in the murder. That really interests me. Not for the first time in Ian Bailey's words, the first time in this set of statements that I've looked at from Ian Bailey, but Is there some inference here that there was more than one person involved here? The wording to there suggests that could be some thought that is there. For example, if I scouted a street looking for houses where the owners were out, and then told a friend that these houses had no one in them, and that friend burgled those houses, I didn't touch them. I just pointed out which ones were there. Well, I didn't burgle the houses, but I was some way involved in the burglary of the houses. And that's why I'm wondering here, again, is there a belief with Ian Bailey that more than one person was involved in the murder of Sophie? Those words do suggest that to me, not proof, but they do suggest that to me. But why? I don't know. The only thing I'll say, and I've mentioned this before in other content on Ian Bailey, is that when he was talking about the domestic abuse and violence that he gave to his partner at the time, Jules Thomas, he said that Jules was partly responsible for it, Drink was partly responsible for it, and yeah, he took a little bit of responsibility as well. So is that what is going on here? I don't know, but those words really interested me. Finally from Ian Bailey, and of course, we now know that Marie Farrell has corrected her first statement where the Gardaí rounded up the height of the man from 5'8" to my size to put me in the frame. And she has said that I was not the man she saw in Skull on Saturday or at Kilfada Bridge on the night of the murder. More controlling language, of course. So, of course, don't question this, because of course this is true. What's coming up, you have to believe, of course. And we now know. Well, do we? And who is we? Is it all of us, or is it just him and a couple of people? But again, controlling, manipulative language from Ian Bailey there. I talked about repeated concepts. Murder, he's mentioned again, or at Kilfada Bridge on the night of the murder. He's not downplaying what happened to Sophie there again, which would be a reassuring sign there. But again, he mentions put me in the frame. And in the other article that we looked at, he also said they were trying to put him in the frame. Interesting choice of words. Being framed for a crime means that evidence is being concocted or lies are being told against you because you're innocent of it and you're being framed for the crime. But Ian Bailey never says I'm being framed for the crime or they're trying to frame me for the crime, which is the words you use when someone is trying to fit you up falsely for the crime. He just says, put me in the frame. The concept around that, I think, is subtly different. Being framed, if he was using that, I think he would be saying they're trying to concoct evidence, they're trying to tell lies to pin this crime on me. To put me in the frame means that they are making the evidence fit him and putting him in the frame. Subtly different. And it's the second time he's used that. So I think Ian Bailey is worried this cold case review is using evidence to put him in the frame of the murder. Here's one I don't get, but I'm really interested by. He said that the Gardaí rounded up the height of the man from 5'8" to my size. Now, rounded up is interesting. He hasn't used changed or altered, which would be a false way of doing it. And I would get that. They changed the height of the man in the statement from 5'8" to my size. They altered the height of the man in the statement from 5'8" to my size. But Ian Bailey uses rounded up. And I had to think about, why do I use round up? Yeah, I use round up when accuracy doesn't matter. Exact accuracy doesn't matter. What does matter is the ballpark, because the ballpark still has to have some degree of accuracy around it. When I use rounded up, the actual precise details don't matter. I'm thinking about the ballpark. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on why he said rounded up there, then put them in the comments, get in touch on social media, because I'm really interested in why you think he would say rounded up rather than changed or altered there. So those are some new statements from Ian Bailey. The conclusions I've got, he is concerned for himself. Ian Bailey's not concerned with justice in these statements. He's not concerned with the family or of Sophie at all. He's concerned for himself. This cold case review worries him. Now, he does say that in fairness, but I think we can look at why it worries him. The longer it goes on, the more worried that he gets. And I think we've got the psychological thing going on there of the things that really worry us are when our mind runs away and plays tricks on us as to what is happening. And I think that is what is happening here. Ian Bailey believes the outcome of the review is that he will be in the frame for the murder. Interestingly, he doesn't articulate why he believes that at all. He doesn't go into any detail there. And he's not content to let the facts on this speak for themselves in these statements. Ian Bailey wants to control the narrative. I hope you got something from that. Do remember, this is the things you can take with you and look at the words that people use around you, whether that's maybe in other true crime cases or whether that's with your family, friends, co-workers. Look at when people talk feelings versus knowledge. When they're talking about feelings, they're talking about how Seems think, or I think this is happening, or I feel like this is going on. That's when people are less sure than when they're using knowledge and talking about factual information that they have. When someone uses straightforward words, that is believable. When you can really get that picture of what they're saying, is what I always say, can you picture what someone's talking about? Or is it really hard to picture what someone's talking about when you actually look at their words? It's hard when people use convoluted phrases and it's hard to understand exactly what they mean. Straightforward words almost always assume they are truthful. Convoluted phrases, you got to look into them and go, why are they talking like that? Why are they qualifying what they're saying? Why don't they have the language inside them just to say something really simple and straightforward? And people's repeated words and repeated phrases reveal what is important to them. If you want more like this, if you want to upskill yourself further, do subscribe to get more content as and when it happens. If you can press the like button, that will always help this get out to more people. As I say, it takes hours to put something like this together. It comes to you at no cost, so if you press the like button, I would be really, really appreciative of that. And your thoughts. Why did he say rounding up? What do you think's going on with Ian Bailey? If we get enough comments on social media and on the other platforms, then I may do a follow-up video to this to deal with some of them. And if you want more content, neveratruerword.com is where to find it. This podcast there. You can find how to contact me on the socials, sign up for the newsletter, watch more videos, or even if you want to take a deeper dive, you can get some books on truthful deception. And we'll see you again soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.